Imagine opening a late Victorian newspaper and finding a story so strange it feels halfway between medicine and nightmare. A young English gentleman, handsome, cultured, musically gifted, and on the back of his head, another face. Not a mask, not a metaphor, a second face, said to smile when he wept and whisper to him in the dark. That is the legend of Edward Mordrake, sometimes spelled Edward Mordrake, one of the most haunting medical tales to survive from the 19th century. The story is usually set in England, and in most tellings, Edward is described as the heir to an aristocratic family who withdrew from society because of the terrible burden he carried. He is said to have begged doctors to remove the second face, believing it murmured things that no human being should hear. And in the most repeated version of the account, he died young, at 23, leaving behind one of the era's strangest case reports. What gives the story its long afterlife is how vivid the details are. The second face was not described as fully alive in the ordinary sense. It was said not to eat, not to speak clearly, not to function like a normal face. And yet witnesses in the story claimed it could move, sneering when Edward was calm, smiling when he was sad, as if it had a will or mood of its own. That image is the part people remember. Not just deformity, but contradiction. A second expression living where no expression should be. The account later appeared in collections of unusual medical cases, including anomalies and curiosities of medicine, where it was preserved alongside other rare and extraordinary anatomical reports from the era. Tracing the story further back leads to one of the earliest widely cited sources, an 1895 newspaper article in the Boston Post, written by Charles Lowton Hildreth. The piece described several unusual human conditions and included the story of Edward Mordrake. From there, the account began to travel. Medical curiosity books referenced it, writers repeated it, illustrations appeared in later publications. Over time, the story began woven into the strange intersection of Victorian medical reporting, popular journalism, and cultural folklore. Some historians have noted that surviving documentation from the period is limited, and the institutions mentioned in certain retellings are difficult to trace with certainty. Yet the narrative itself continued to circulate for decades, carried forward through medical compilations, newspaper archives, and later retellings. Whether preserved as an extraordinary medical report, an embellished historical account, or something that exists somewhere between those possibilities, the story endured. And with every retelling, the image at its centre, a man said to carry a second face upon the back of his head, only grew more haunting. Still, the story did not persist for no reason. Part of its staying power is that medicine does know real conditions that can produce shocking craniofacial anomalies, including rare forms of parasitic twinning or severe facial duplication. Later medical commentators have suggested that if a case like Edward Mordrake had any real-world inspiration at all, it might loosely resemble conditions such as craniopagus parasiticus or related developmental abnormalities, but no verified historical record has emerged tying those diagnoses to an actual English nobleman named Edward Mordrake. And that leaves the story in a strange place. Not simply a medical case, not simply a ghost story, not quite a hoax in the modern internet sense either. It is a Victorian creation or preservation of dread, dressed in the language of autonomy. What makes it linger is not whether every detail can be pinned down, it is the human image at the centre of it. A young man supposedly trapped between appearance and affliction, carrying something no one else could see without horror, and no one could remove without risk. Whether Edward Mordrake ever truly lived as described, The story has outlived its century because it touches a very old fear, not just of deformity, but of divided identity, of a second self, a second voice, a second face turned always toward the world behind you. And perhaps that is why the tale still feels unnervingly alive. Because even now, more than 100 years later, it does not read like a solved case. It reads like something caught between medicine, myth, and memory, and still not entirely willing to choose just one.